This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Ghannam.
And I'm Jamal Dajani.
Jamal, we have a lot of breaking news in Palestine today. Just in the last 48 hours, there's been a major escalation of conflict between the Houthi resistance fighters and the apartheid state of Israel. On Friday, the Houthi rebels sent a drone into Tel Aviv, near the U.S. Embassy, actually, an office of the U.S. Embassy, and in a stealth attack was able to evade Israeli, forces and their monitoring devices and have an attack. Since that time, Israel has launched a major attack in the port city of Hadid, with killing at least 3 Yemenis and injuring over 80. And they intercepted a missile just in the last number of hours coming from Yemen to Tel Aviv. So the situation is escalating. We're going to talk about that. In the next big news that we're going to cover today, the ICJ issued a ruling, and I might add, probably 57 years too late. But the ICJ issued a ruling saying that the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza is illegal under international law. So this is a major development. This is something that Palestinians have been speaking about, as well as the world community, for many decades now. But the ICJ has issued this ruling, and a number of countries have gotten on board in support of this. Not surprisingly, the only country to condemn an international law ruling has been the United States, as well as Israel. And finally, we're going to be talking about Bella Hadid's Adidas ad. Bella Hadid did a very prominent ad for Adidas. And after her criticism of the genocide in Gaza, Jamal, Adidas decided to drop the ad. But before we get to all those stories, we're going to watch a really great interview that you did with Laila Al-Arian. She's the executive producer of Fault Lines, the Al Jazeera English US-based news magazine. And she's going to talk about a documentary she did titled The Night Won't End, Biden's War on Gaza, which is a documentary she co-produced, which tells the story of 3 Palestinians in Gaza and their struggle to survive. It's not only a great interview, but it's a great documentary.
That's right, Jess. And so before we talk to Laila, we are going to watch a clip of the documentary. Again, the documentary is The Night Won't End, Biden's War on Gaza. We are going to watch a clip that's basically heartbreaking. A mother talks basically about her daughter who has been killed by the Israelis, the story of Hind, which millions of people have heard around the world. Let's watch that clip, and then afterwards we'll be joined by Laila.
يعني بالذات الليل لما يجي برضاش يخلص. يعني حتى تصحى في الليل طول الليل بتكون صاحي بتقول بدهش يطلع الصبح بدهش يطلع الصبح. إياد لما بصحى بالليل بحط راسه تحت راسي بخبي وجهه عن الليل بقول لي خلصش الليل بدهش يخلص الليل مش راضي يخلص الليل. الليل طويل، الليل مرعب، الليل يعني خوف، الليل يعني إنك تذكر هند.
Israel continues to dispatch hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to what it refers to as humanitarian zones across Gaza, only to then bomb and kill women, children, and civilians trapped in these areas. The Night Won't End, Biden's War on Gaza, is a documentary that tells the story of 3 Palestinian families in Gaza, the devastation and anguish the ongoing genocide has brought on them, and their struggle to survive. It is co-produced by award-winning Laila Al-Arian. Laila joins us this week on Arab Talk. She is the executive producer of Fault Lines, Al Jazeera English's US-based news magazine. Welcome to Arab Talk, Laila.
Thank you so much for having me, Jamal.
Let me begin by asking you to describe the 3 families you chose. They're just a few among thousands maybe even hundreds of thousands, undergoing similar experiences. Does each family give an example of one category of atrocity and humanitarian crisis being experienced by Palestinians as whole in Gaza?
Absolutely. Well, you'd be hard-pressed to find a single Palestinian family in Gaza or even in the diaspora with family members in Gaza that has not experienced the absolute horror and torture and starvation and killing and maiming and orphaning of this war. And it was very overwhelming for my team at Al Jazeera English Fault Lines to really know where to start. We worked on this film, which is 78 minutes long. It's available on YouTube, called The Night Won't End. We started working on it back in late December, early January. And we really wanted to kind of select cases in Gaza because, again, all of us are so overwhelmed by the stream of just horrific videos that we get every single day on our phones, on social media, not necessarily in the mainstream media, but that's a different topic. So the reason we chose the three families, we chose the Salim family, and that's because we know that the vast majority of civilians killed in Gaza are killed by airstrikes. So we knew that we should focus on a family that experienced and survived an airstrike and had loved ones killed in an airstrike. And the Salim family experienced an airstrike on December 11th of last year that killed 100 members of the same family, the Salim family. They were in the building that was bombed. They managed to survive, but they were injured. And then just a week later, they experienced a horrific incident that has not left my mind since I heard testimony about it and saw some very disturbing aftermath of the bodies of basically a summary execution, a field execution in Gaza City as well, in the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood. And the father figure of the family was killed alongside 10 other men and who were all in that building. They were tortured, they were beaten, they were insulted, everything you can. They were attacked with quadcopters, with tanks. And of course, 11 men that day were shot point blank. We also wanted to focus on attacks in the South in so-called safe zones. So we know that as the Biden administration has said time and again, well, Israel, so generously tells people where to go. We don't even do that. This is something John Kirby loves to say. It's interesting how much he insults the U.S. military in his vehement defense of Israel. He said, we don't even do this. They give them maps. They tell them where to go. Well, what our partner organization, Air Wars, which is a really incredible research organization based in the UK that looks at civilian harm, what they found was that every time the Israeli military would tell Palestinians to flee to the south in these so-called safe zones, they would not be safe. Safety is non-existent in Gaza. So we looked at the case of the Al-Ghaf family that went from northern Gaza to the south in Khan Yunis, which was declared a safe zone. And the father, Abdullah Al-Ghaf, his children were very hungry, as is the case with people in Gaza throughout the Gaza Strip. And he went to go, his youngest son, who was a toddler, age 2, told him, please, I want some biscuits. He went to go to the store to get him biscuits. And during that trip, his wife and son were killed, including his 2-year-old son, Firas. His other son, Muhammad, was badly injured and succumbed to his injuries because of Israel's destruction of hospitals. And our team in Gaza interviewed him as he was displaced in a tent in Rafah. That was a few months ago. So now I think presumably, like so many in Rafah, he's now had to be displaced yet again. So that focus was on safe zones. We also looked at the killing of 6-year-old Hind Rajab, again, making the point that safety is elusive in Gaza. There is no safety. So her family is also from the north. They went to the south. Her mother, Wissam, was really an incredible woman, told our team that the reason she decided to go back to the north from the south is that her mom told her one day, please write your name on your arm, because if you're killed, people will be able to identify you. And she thought, well, if I'm going to be killed anyway, I might as well be killed in my home, in my neighborhood where people already know me. So she made the fateful decision to return back north. And one day the Israeli military targeted the car that her 6-year-old daughter Hind was in. This is obviously the most well-known case out of all the cases that we covered. And, our film does a really detailed forensic reconstruction, as well as interviews with the first responders, with her mother, with others who were involved in the case to really reconstruct what happened to him. But the overall, I would say, theme is that the Israeli military is operating as, I would say, a kill squad in Gaza. They are not distinguishing between civilians and people who are fighters. And I think this is something that has been firmly established in 9 months, that this is a campaign of extermination, of starvation. And there's very firm evidence of that when you have one incident after another of people testifying and saying, we told them we were civilians that they came and shooting. This is not a military that's operating in any way other than as an extermination force.
Yeah, absolutely. There are hundreds of evidences shooting people carrying white flags and civilians, riding in a car and so forth. I want to go back to the heartbreaking story of Hind Rajab and her conversation with an ambulance dispatcher before she died, galvanized millions of people around the world against Israel's disregard for children's lives. We learn about Hind through her voice and pleas as she gasped her last breath. There are thousands of Hinds, many still buried under the rubble. Why don't we hear about them in corporate media?
Well, I think corporate media has engaged in the normalization of Palestinian killing and Palestinian death well before October 7th. Even the way that October 7th is reported as if it's the beginning of history does the audience a disservice, because that's simply not true. We know that 2023, the months leading up to October 7th, as well as the previous year, were among the deadliest ever for Palestinians in the West Bank. We know that in 2021, more than 500 Palestinians were killed in Israel's war on Gaza. So we know that Palestinians are killed all the time, that there's violence unleashed against Palestinians, whether it's by the Israeli military or by armed Israeli settlers. And the mainstream media simply does not consider that violence to be newsworthy. And at the heart of this is a hierarchy of life. It's as simple as that. Palestinian life is simply viewed as worth far less than Israeli lives. When you see breaking news alerts about updates about captives who are Israeli, who were taken on October 7th, and what's happening with their lives, and you don't see breaking news alerts, let alone much coverage of actual massacres that happen on a daily basis, it's very clear that there's a hierarchy of life, that the media is simply abandoning its role as an independent, important and critical conveyor and chronicle of news, of the first draft of history, in favor of aiding and abetting Israeli genocide.
Israel has banned international journalists from entering Gaza during its onslaught to hide its war crimes. More than 150 Palestinian journalists have been killed by Israel, including members of their family. Some of those killed and injured are colleagues of yours at Al Jazeera. Talk about your team who worked on this documentary on the ground during these very dangerous conditions. They made a great sacrifice to shed light on truth.
They did. Well, we worked with a production company that has been producing out of Gaza, but also around the world, called Mediatown, run by journalist and filmmaker Ashraf Masharawi. And Mediatown then went on to work with filmmakers that both work directly with Mediatown or are contracted with them in Gaza, in both the north and the south. So we know that it's near impossible for people now to travel from north to south or vice versa, because the Israeli military has set up checkpoints along the way, has cut the Gaza Strip in half, and basically snipers are at the ready, killing people who are trying to cross in between, sometimes even people who've received permission to cross. So because of that, and because the Israeli military, as you mentioned, and government are not allowing journalists to go into Gaza, we had to actually hire local crews. So if we were filming in the north, local crews in the north and vice versa for the south. And these crews are just doing this work under the most extraordinarily challenging circumstances you can imagine. Everything that people of Gaza are going through, they're going through. They're losing family members. One of the cameramen in December, his name is Hussein Jabir, he was walking and his daughter was killed by an Israeli soldier and he was injured in his arms. Young daughter, 5 or 6 years old, was killed in front of him. They're grieving their family, they're hungry. One of the photojournalists we worked with told us, he said, on one night, me and 10 other men shared one can of food, one can of beans, and that's all they're eating. They don't have offices to work out of. One of the cameramen we worked with actually had to film on his cell phone because his camera was destroyed very, very early on in Israel's bombardment. So they're, working on their phones or even just travel. Logistics of setting up filming is very, very difficult because phone lines are down. Internet is very, very spotty, very difficult. So in order for them to even try to reach the people they're interviewing, they would have to physically get to them, which meant spending a ton of money. There's very little fuel. So if you're lucky, you can find a car that will take you part of the way, but otherwise you're walking or you're taking a donkey. The situation is just, I don't even think we know the half of it, honestly. It's extremely difficult.
I don't think we even know. I mean, people cite more than 38,000 people have been killed, but now new reports say that maybe as high as 180 or 190,000. We don't know that yet. So the United States military and financial support of Israel's genocide in Gaza is an important part of your documentary. That is one of the criteria for Fault Lines Productions, isn't it? Can you explain why?
Exactly. So our program, being that it's a documentary program on Al Jazeera English based in Washington, D.C., so based in the U.S., it's the only U.S. Correspondent-led documentary program. So we focus on the U.S. Most of our stories are set in the U.S. or in the Americas, so Latin America, the Caribbean as well. But when we do cover a story overseas, it has to have a strong U.S. connection. Unfortunately, it was not very difficult to find the U.S. connection on the war in Gaza or in the war in Gaza because it's the United States that's Israel's largest financial backer and military supplier. So we know that even in the killing of Hind Rajab, 2 U.S.-made fragments were found at the scene. Now, we don't know if those fragments were exactly the ones involved in the attack on Hind or the paramedics, but we know they were at the scene, and we know that, sadly, that this isn't that unique. We know that U.S. Made bombs are often deployed on Gaza, and that fragments are found all the time, and that throughout the last 10 months, the Biden administration has been sending Israel 5,000-pound bombs, 2,000-pound bombs, really whatever they need to continue carrying out the killing. And we know that as journalist Akbar Ahmed at HuffPost told our team that a former Israeli official told him with one call, the U.S. could make this stop. But this is a political decision to continue to allow Israel to carry out this mass killing and maiming campaign in Gaza for all these means.
You and others at Fault Lines have tried for months to meet with the State Department and other Biden administration officials to present the excellent documentations you've collected about war crimes perpetrated by Israel in Gaza. What has been the response?
We tried for a period of 4 months to get them to give us a sit-down interview. We tried to tell them, listen, this is a topic that's near and dear to our audience, whether in the United States or around the world, given who Al Jazeera is and the types of stories and coverage that it does. They didn't care. They really were, very quickly turning down our requests. Simply saying, the Secretary of State doesn't have time in his schedule, or we won't be able to give you anybody. Even Matthew Miller wouldn't give us an interview, and we wrote him directly. And it's his job as spokesperson to sit down with the media and to defend this policy. And they declined over and over again. And that's really shameful. If they're proud of this policy, if this is something that they get up and defend in the State Department every single day or in the White House, then they should be able to answer some questions about it. But they didn't. And also, this is a State Department and a White House that talks time and again about press freedom and the importance of press freedom. Well, part of press freedom is engaging the press and being able to answer tough questions, and they chose not to, which I think is disrespectful to the audience.
It is. I think they just don't want to be, they don't want to have their backs to the wall and to answer real questions, not softball questions. Biden himself said that Israel's use of U.S. arms likely violated international law at some point, but evidence is incomplete. In addition to raising awareness, do you think that this documentary could be used as evidence of this administration's complicity?
Well, we know that some human rights lawyers are already looking at some of the cases that we documented in our story for potential legal action. So, that's one way that the reporting may end up leading somewhere. We don't know. We know that courts are also involved human beings and human beings' interpretations of the law. So we'll see if that goes anywhere. But what I do think the film has already done for audiences is really clarify the Biden administration's unwavering support of Israel throughout its months of bombardment of Gaza. I think that's something that we've all already know, but seeing it all together in long form in this documentary alongside the killings that have happened have made it clear even more so what the Biden administration's role is in all this.
I want to go back to Hind's story, the corroboration of Israel's targeting of the Rajab's car, then the ambulance that went to rescue Hind, is extremely thorough, including forensic evidence, sound, telephone, and communications. Give an example of how thorough the journalism is in Hind's case, as well as that of the Salem family.
Well, we know that unfortunately, society, especially Western society, mainstream media, oftentimes view Palestinians as unreliable narrators of their own killings, whether it's Palestinian journalists on the ground who are actually doing incredible, important, crucial journalism documenting what's happening to the people of Gaza day in and day out, or even news organizations like Al Jazeera, whose professionalism and credibility has been well established. So we knew that we needed to go above and beyond in collecting documentary evidence about all of the incidents that we covered, whether it was video footage, text messages, audio analysis. And what we did with Hind Rajab's case is we worked with Forensic Architecture, a very well-respected UK-based organization that reconstructs attacks in meticulous detail, or as well as Earshot, which is an audio analysis organization. And they particularly looked at, in addition to reconstructing the scene, the tank, and Hind Rajab's family car, they analyzed a phone call between Hind's 15-year-old cousin, Layan, and the Palestine Red Crescent Society, in which you could hear a lot of gunfire right before the line cuts out. And we assume that's the gunfire that took Layan's life. And what they concluded was that they were able to kind of calculate roughly how far the distance between the tank and the car, the kind of weapons used, because Israel has tried to claim that its forces weren't even in the area, but they confirmed that this sounded like an automatic weapon mounted on a Merkava tank, as opposed to the kind of rifles used by groups like Hamas. And they also were able to determine that whoever attacked the car, the soldier likely could see the people in the car, given the kinds of scopes that you have in these tanks. So this is really crucial to our understanding of what happened to that family and their horrific final moments. We also spoke with the first responders at the Palestine Red Crescent Society, all about their phone calls with them, as well as the fact that they, for 3 hours, sought to get coordination with the Israeli unit, I think it's called Kogat, that the ambulance needed to coordinate with in order to go rescue Hind, that they got the coordination, they got the approval, they even got a map sent to them by Kogat, and before they dispatched the paramedics, who were then promptly attacked as they reached the scene.
So Israel can lie and make unsubstantiated claims, and they immediately get picked up by mainstream media. Then Palestinian claims have an impossible high bar to meet. I mean, that's the moral, right? It's the double standards that so you went beyond and above to provide all this evidence to your documentary. The night won't end. Biden's war on Gaza can be viewed on aljazeera.com fault lines as well as on Al Jazeera's English YouTube channel. Check it out. Congratulations to you, Laila, and to your team, and thank you for coming on Arab Talk.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm just heartbroken in seeing that clip and the discussion that you had with Laila Al-Arian, the executive producer of Fault Lines. The mother of Hind and her story, and then your interview with Laila, speaks so much and speaks volumes for the amount of pain and devastation that is being brought to Palestinians' families in Gaza, just trying to survive. I mean, I want our listeners and viewers to take note of this, because this is the kind of insight and story that we're not hearing about in the mainstream media in the United States, or for that matter, in other places. It's very moving, but frankly, for me, Jamal, very sad.
It's absolutely very sad. And even when we talked about like the story of Hind, there are hundreds, if not of thousands, of similar stories of Palestinian children. Many of them are still buried under the rubble because of Israeli bombardment. Moving on to our next story, Jess, is, of course, that's, I think, a big story. The UN's International Court of Justice, the ICJ, has ordered Israel to end its occupation of the Palestinian territories. And as you've mentioned, 57 years late, as rapidly as possible. That's the order, which is very important. I shouldn't make light of it, that they made this order that they should end its occupation of the Palestinian territories, and I'm quoting here, as rapidly as possible, and make full reparations for its internationally wrongful acts. That's another quote. And of course, it's in a sweeping, damning advisory opinion that says the occupation violates international law. I think this is a historic announcement, Jess.
Yeah, it's historic, but I think we need to put it into context. On the one side, for Palestinians who've been basically screaming at the top of their lungs for 57 years that the occupation of Palestine has been illegal, brutal, and exacted a heavy toll on Palestinians for over 57 years. Some Palestinians may feel that this is a little too late for the ongoing, basically devastation being brought to Palestine by the apartheid state. But on the other hand, and I think rightly you point out, in terms of what this does internationally, is that it situates the apartheid state of Israel and its settler colonial project in the West Bank and in Jerusalem clearly as being illegal in international law. And the point that you made, which I think is really good, and to not only to cease it immediately, but to offer reparations. So I have a number of questions for you, Jamal, in thinking about this. What do Palestinians in the West Bank and Jerusalem feel like this is something they can count on? Or is the impact of this going to take a number of decades, like some of these other rulings? Is there going to be any material impact on the ground for Palestinians whose homes are being taken away and whose land is being stolen by the settlers in the West Bank and Jerusalem?
Simple answer, no. And not until the United States stops vetoing resolutions and supporting the apartheid state of Israel. I mean, if we're going to talk about resolutions and other declarations, we can go to UN resolutions 242 and 181 and 338 and all these resolutions that Israel has never honored, to withdraw to the 1967 borders or any of those, or the ones that came with condemnations of Israel and then the United States vetoes. So as long as the United States, I mean, it's good for, I guess, moral support for Palestinians, and it's good to put that in writing so other countries recognize this and it reaffirms that this is occupied territory. But also for now, for many Palestinians, it's not about just the West Bank and Gaza. I mean, Israel, the Knesset, they just recently voted that they're basically are not going to be abiding by Oslo and that there won't be a Palestinian state. So if Israel is not abiding by Oslo and canceling a Palestinian state, so what's the alternative? The alternative is basically a single state, which will be an apartheid state, and that's the current situation here, except you have an ethnic group, a preferred ethnic group, and another group living under occupation and horrific conditions, and that's what Israel and this current government want to continue doing. I should add to this just that this opinion was, so we won't confuse it with what's going on in Gaza now. The opinion was provided in response to a request from the UN General Assembly in 2022. Therefore, it precedes the Gaza conflict and is not directly linked to it. Of course, but it will add pressure on Israel and its allies. After all, now we're watching this. This took 2 years to come up with this answer. And now they came up with this answer, and you have more than 38,000 Palestinians have been killed. And it comes, the timing, I think it's good. Aside from everything else is going on. Israel's prime minister and his minister of defense are accused of war crimes. Israel's an apartheid state, as has been certified by several human rights organizations. And Israel is committing genocide. It adds to this whole list of Israel's criminality and globally, basically. And the timing couldn't have been better to kind of highlight this, because perhaps people will pay more attention to it than if it came, let's say, a year ago.
Right. Point well taken. But as is typical for the Israeli case, when they get pressured internationally, their response isn't to comply with international law. Their response is to double down, more attacks, more land theft, more denial of Oslo, and the ongoing apartheid process and the genocide in Gaza. So I think that the Israeli kind of right-wing extremist government right now, which is like all governments, by the way, of Israel, they're all kind of extremists. This one happens to be the extreme of the extreme, will continue to double down. And if we look at what they're doing now in Yemen, invading, another sovereign country, what they're doing in the north with Hezbollah, what they're doing in Gaza, what they're doing in the West Bank and in Jerusalem, the whole country is kind of involved in this, not only illegal colonization, but war and genocide. And it's heading down a path of ongoing, I would say, decompensation, Jamal. Things in the apartheid state are very unsettled for Israelis. The economic situation continues to deteriorate. And surprise, surprise, Benjamin Netanyahu's coming to give his address to the U.S. Joint Congress this week, Jamal, this week. And now that Israel's occupation has been deemed illegal, I'll be curious to see what Joe Biden, what Hakeem Jeffries, what Schumer, what politicians now are going to stand up and give the head of this criminal enterprise, criminal enterprise that we call Israel. Yeah, but the whole enterprise is criminal. Let's see how they stand up and give him a standing ovation with all this criminality? I'll be very not surprised, but interested.
You know the answer. I think thousands of people will descend on Washington, D.C. The Speaker of the House has been threatening to arrest people who are going to interrupt Netanyahu, meaning even if a congressman or congresswoman interrupt him, they'll get arrested by the sergeant of arms. That's paraphrasing his words. And imagine, like, you could have hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating against the President of the United States, but then when Netanyahu comes in, you have to roll the red carpet and bend the knee. I mean, that's what's going on. I should just say something quickly, because we have two other stories to cover, that the Hague Court found Israel in breach of Article 3 of the International Convention on the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, which says, and quoting here, parties particularly condemn racial segregation and apartheid and undertake to prevent, prohibit, and eradicate all practices of this nature in territories under their jurisdiction. So not only they're saying to them that you are illegally occupying territory, but you are also practicing apartheid. So in essence, it also summarizes or adds to its long list of the demand, confirms what Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, and all these other organizations have said before. Now, adding to this, this is a UN entity, basically the ICJ, and they talk about forcible, all these illegal things, forcible evictions, extensive house demolitions, transfer by Israel of the settlers, failure to punish the settlers who attack Palestinians, and restricting Palestinians to access to water, the Palestinian population to access to water, use Israel's depletion and use of natural resources in the occupied Palestinian territories. It's really a long, long list. I mean, if any lawyer or any journalist who reads it, it's like, I haven't seen something like this. Everybody should be incensed and angry and should make Benjamin Netanyahu persona non grata. And in fact, Israel should be kicked out of the United Nations.
Right. I agree completely. But we know that in fact, what's going to happen is that he's going to be celebrated when he comes to the Congress. Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, who are the leaders of the Democratic wing of the joint session, will be sitting there clapping and giving him a standing ovation, kind of supporting the genocide and the illegality and the criminality of the state. And of course, Jamal, this will only come, all the things that you say will only come when the United States is ready to confront the criminality of this apartheid state. And in this election time, and with Donald Trump most likely being our next president, I don't see it happening very soon.
You're absolutely right. Our next story is about what's going on now. I think we might be dragged into a regional war, meaning dragging the United States to do Israel's dirty work, which it has been doing since Gaza and before, bombing Yemen. And the military spokesperson for Yemen today declared that Tel Aviv is an unsafe zone. And he's actually using the language that the Israelis use when they want to evict people from their homes in Gaza. So I said, we just will give a warning to the residents of, he called it occupied Jaffa, that this is an unsafe zone. You better leave. And we know, of course, everybody must have heard or watched the news how a drone made it all the way from Yemen, 2,200 kilometers, undetected, evaded all Israel's sophisticated multi-billion-dollar defense systems, and struck, I think a block away or half a block away from the U.S. Embassy in the heart of Tel Aviv, killing one person, injuring several. 3 other drones were intercepted by the United States, not by Israel, and one evaded, and they, and today they launched a rocket targeting Eilat. It was intercepted. But again, in between, Israel has bombed the seaport of Hodeidah in Yemen and targeted I guess, oil supplies and other.
Oh, but it's it's the main shipping port, Jamal, also
Right.
for bringing food, water, and medicine into the Yemeni community, throughout Yemen. And this is going to cause, or has the potential to cause, another grave humanitarian crisis in Yemen. So, this catastrophic failure of intelligence by, of the Israeli government and military, that this happened is really, the biggest story right now by far. But the attacks on a sovereign country like Yemen and targeting a civilian population, you say may be dragged into a war. Would it be fair to say, Jamal, that we're already in the war with Yemen? This seems to be a war.
Well, that's actually my next point, just because this is what I've been reading, statements by military experts. The logistics, the refueling of the F-15 planes that Israel used, who helped them, who refueled the planes, the satellite imaging and information and all this logistics. And even though they're denying it, they flew over Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the only country in the Middle East, including Israel, that possesses the AWACS planes. This is the most sophisticated radar planes. Actually, Israel doesn't have that. They got those in advanced version since Ronald Reagan, if you recall the story about buying 3 AWACS planes. So they couldn't have not known that these planes or fighter jets were over their territory. And of course, there was a coordination. They must have notified them through the Americans or directly, like, we are going to use your airspace. They're denying this. And Yemen also now issued also a warning saying anyone who corroborates with the Israeli enemy are also subject to being targeted. And, there is no love lost between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia. So what I'm saying is this could expand, and we don't have the time to talk about what's happening on the northern front with Hezbollah, because every single day Israel attacks a target in Lebanon and Hezbollah retaliates. And I don't know what's the final figure, but thousands and thousands of tens of thousands of Israelis living in the north, they haven't been able to return home for months now.
Oh, I know that number, Jamal. It's 100,000 Israelis have been evacuated from their homes in the north. I just saw that. It's 100,000 Israelis.
Okay,
so
and then the other point...
These are multiple fronts.
Yeah, and then the other point I want to add is that also another report, sometimes like you have to get your news outside the political system and get it from other sources like business. Well, business is crashing in Eilat, the Israeli port of Eilat. They had to lay over, I think, I forgot the language they used, whether to kind of like fire them all or give them 6 months vacation, because they have no business. They have nothing. They have nothing.
Of course.
All these people who are working there to unload those boats don't have work. So that's also costing Israel millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars.
Well, yeah, Jamal, and this is the story that you're not reading about. The number of Israelis also with dual citizenship who've left Israel and are fleeing to Europe and the United States, the 100,000 in the north who cannot live there anymore, the front, with Hezbollah and Lebanon in the north, now with Yemen. And I'll just add parenthetically, the idea that you would mess with the Houthis and kind of threaten them, not a good move, Jamal. The Houthis are not going to back away.
No.
And this was a catastrophic failure, Jamal. It was just 4 or 5 drones. And if they send 100 drones and 1 or 2 get by, which they will, because we know that from recent intelligence reports that the system that Israel has gotten from the United States cannot withstand multiple, large numbers of either missiles or drones coming in. So I really believe that this is going to be a significant escalation. I believe it's already war. I mean, they've invaded a sovereign country of Yemen. So Gaza has fallen from the news cycle, Jamal, the genocide continues. There's no letting up. 500,000 Palestinians are starving to death, including children. We saw that in the documentary. So the situation is already getting worse, not just for Palestinians, but Israel continues to be a pariah and a criminal state and being exposed.
So our last story, just Adidas has dropped the supermodel Bella Hadid, Palestinian American supermodel, I should say, Palestinian American supermodel Bella Hadid.
Ridiculous.
From
Ridiculous.
an advertising campaign for retro shoes referencing the 1972 Munich Olympics. Now, mind you, Bella Hadid wasn't born in 1972, okay? She's very young. I don't know her exact age, but she's in her 20s. So they had this ad, they had this agreement with her. This is over a year in the making. Okay, they're ramping up for the Olympics this year. They have a contract with her because also the other thing now, she's consulting with her lawyers, and I hope she gets every single penny. She's going to sue them. And so all of a sudden they had her ad. I mean, I guess she and her sister are the most beautiful models around. And then all the Hasbara starts buzzing like a beehive and attacking her and attacking Adidas and, criticizing Israel, just had all its Hasbara army criticizing the choice of Miss Hadid. It accused her of hostility to Israel. It has nothing to do with her statement. These are statements from before. I mean, she's a proud Palestinian American who denounced Israel's crimes and genocide and apartheid, just like hundreds of thousands of people. And then they link it. They noted that 11 Israeli athletes had been killed by Palestinian attackers at the Munich Games. And so Adidas panics and subsequently apologized to Israel and said that they would revise their campaign, and basically contacted her and canceled her contract. So,
oh, really? Well, how are they going to cancel a contract that's already been executed? They decide to cancel it. Bella Hadid is right to consult her lawyers, obviously. This is a breach of contract. But what is striking to me, Jamal, is that Adidas is shooting itself economically and politically in the foot. Yet again, you have the most important model, supermodel in the world, advertising your shoe leading up to the Olympics, and you're gonna cave to the Hasbaristas around this campaign. You're shooting yourself in the foot economically because guess what? Now Adidas is going to be the target of the BDS campaign. People will not buy Adidas shoes because of what they're doing to Bella Hadid. So they are never missing an opportunity to make mistakes, Adidas. They had this golden opportunity to use Bella Hadid. And she should get every penny of this contract and then more, Jamal, because this is a breach of contract.
So listen to the official Israel X site or Twitter site. They tweeted, and this is what kind of tipped the pendulum or in the balance for Adidas to say we're going to cancel that. They were so scared. They wrote, and I'm quoting here, guess who the face of their campaign is? Bella Hadid, a half Palestinian model. Okay? Like a slur. Half Palestinian. You never refer to half Palestinian, half model. Guess who the face of their campaign is? Again, she has nothing to do with the Munich Olympics. She wasn't even born then. And then the way, guess who? Like, who did you want to advertise those shoes? We know who, they wanted, basically, aside from everything else, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's so ridiculous, Jamal. I am never, I go like, I scratch my head. I think about what a horrible decision this is, both in terms of like the economics of it, as well as the political caving that Adidas is doing. This is in the tradition of like, you know, how Germany continues to like cave into the Hasbaristas and their attempts to kind of be cowed, if you will, and you know, kind of bullied by the apartheid state to do these decisions. But it's going to come back to haunt them. I mean, think about it from a purely business point of view. Do you want generate?
Think about what happened to Starbucks and think about what happened to McDonald's.
Yeah, exactly. If Adidas is going to be told that they're going to be part of the BDS campaign, they will lose billions of dollars. And losing Bella Hadid, who is universally loved, minus the Israeli extremists, universally beloved, and you couldn't ask for a better marketing kind of representation for your shoe than Bella Hadid. It's really kind of a catastrophic decision by Adidas, very ignorant decision, caving into these racist kind of attacks on her. It's only going to backfire, Jamal. Actually, it's going to help Bella Hadid, and it's only going to hurt Adidas. Not that she needs help.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest shows, and we'll talk to you next week.
See you next week.